right, welcome to the Coaching Collective podcast, episode 11. Today we welcome Darian Bates. Darian is a online coach located in Melbourne, Australia, and is well known for her collaboration with the Physique Collective located in the UK. She specializes in female athletes and female PEDs and is pretty well known across the web for this. Without further ado, introduce yourself and let us know what you're about.
Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up really nicely there. I have been coaching for since I can remember. I think I'm like 13 years coaching now. During COVID, moved to the online space. And then the past few years has been more recently diving into female PED use and just opening up the conversation there for females to have a safe space to raise any concerns and to get a little bit more educated themselves.
Cool. Well, so what sort of led you to that female space as well, the PED space specifically?
So when I was 14, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. Sorry, I was diagnosed when I was 15. It started when I was 13 or 14. And then once I kind of regained my weight, I just noticed that things still weren't functioning properly. I still wasn't getting my period. And I had listened to it was actually on one of Luke Miller's podcasts. Joe was on it. So Joe Jeffries, the owner of the Physique Collective, and he was talking about testosterone use in females. I've always been pretty unconventional in my approaches just because of my past history with being in hospital and working with doctors and the healthcare system. I didn't really trust it that much. So I was always like looking for alternatives, I guess. And that really sparked my interest, him talking about it. So I went and got my own labs done, and then I set up a consult call with him. We decided from there that we would start testosterone replacement therapy. And the benefits that I just saw within how I was feeling, how quickly my body composition changed, how quickly my mood was elevated, my sleep improved, my strength improved. From there, I just I'm not someone that would just take something and especially because I tried to go through the medical field to get the testosterone. And I sort of had to go back with him. And I said to Joe, I was like they're trying to prescribe me estrogen and progesterone. Like, what can I come back with that's a legitimate excuse for them to give me testosterone? So then I ended up reading into all the research and things like that. And then from there, it kind of went into physique development. And then the things that I was experiencing as far as this HPO suppression goes, a lot of athletes and females within the bodybuilding space, when they're going through extreme bouts of dieting where energy availability is very low, energy output is by far higher than what they've ever had it, and they experience the same HPO suppression. And then from there, it kind of led into virilization and things like that.
Cool. And just for listeners as well, because obviously symptoms of low testosterone in males are pretty well known. What kind of symptoms were you personally experiencing? Obviously, some will be similar, but anything really specific?
So if you imagine just like a menopausal woman, I felt exactly like that. So I was diagnosed as hypogonadal, which means that you just don't produce the level of hormones that what you need. So, hot sweats at night, no sex drive, really no intention to date or be intimate with anyone whatsoever. I was storing a lot of visceral fat, a lot of body fat around my stomach. Not that I was overweight or anything, but when we look at the proportion of where most of my body fat was going, it was to my stomach, which we tend to see in menopausal women. Those were the main symptoms. And then obviously the very obvious physiological ones of not getting my period or my menstrual bleed.
Yeah, cool. And then on that as well, so did the doctors put you on TRT, or did they sort of stick to their guns with the initial?
Eventually, I got an endocrinologist to give me the cream. But because of the half-life of the cream and it's very easy for it to transfer onto other things, I just decided that I wanted to go underground and do the injectable anyway. The difficulty with the injectable is that it is usually dosed at the 250 milligrams per mil. Luckily, I don't know if I should be saying this on the internet, but
I was going to ask you anyway.
Joe got one of his guys to ship me some, and that was 20 milligrams per mil. And luckily that got through. So
do you have trouble with availability of that long term though?
Well, they gave me 10 vials of it, and that's going to last me 4 years easily. If you think about how much a female uses, it's 3 usually 8 milligrams a week that it will last me forever. But it is more readily available in the UK. So in the UK, they have like what they call femtest, which is 10 milligrams per mil. But generally we find like if we're wanting to get even 100 milligrams per mil, it's the propionate. And for listeners, that just means that like we're going to have more higher peaks and drop-offs. And when we're looking at sort of a dosage, if you're doing 100 milligrams per mil, the littlest amount that you could probably inject is like 1 milligram. And then if you're starting on 3 milligrams, that's going to be every other day. You're still going to have those really big peaks and drop off, whereas we want more of an ethynate or a cypionate. So it does become quite difficult. I have learned, just in case I ever need it, how to dilute it myself. And in case clients ever need it, but I've never done it. But I guess like that would be a fun girls' night. Like we're gonna dilute some testosterone.
I actually suggested diluting it to someone when I was in Dubai, and they looked at me like, "What's wrong with you?" And it's sort of like you don't really have a choice here. Like it's not. Because obviously, like I don't want to jump too far ahead, so we'll try not to divert too fast. But a lot of like I don't really know any females who go with like the testosterone kind of route over like an oral kind of route. Like very few in Australia. And I think part of that is the fact not only are we somewhat backwards with the information available, but also like there's just no sourcing.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think I'm very much aware of the difficulties around sourcing it. I think like for females, it's kind of worth just weighing up your options there. And it's like, okay, well, do we then risk virilization and we risk sort of these long-term health implications from taking orals for the sake of bodybuilding? Like to me, it's just not really worth it. And I often encourage my females to kind of put bodybuilding into perspective. And it's not something that you want to do for the rest of your life. Like this is something that you want to do in your 20s, and you need to think about the long-term goals of, okay, what does the rest of your life look like? But yeah, you're right. Like probably nine out of 10 women on the IFBB stage in Australia are on Anavar.
Yeah, well, 9 out of 10 actually I reckon would be like conservative.
Yeah.
Touching on that point that you just mentioned, do you ever get females that come to you and then they're at that point in like their career where they're sort of at the back end of it and they realize the damage that they have done during their career, and then like later in life, like obviously they want to have kids, etc., and then they sort of just in a position where they don't know like where to go from there if they have already done damage?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like the common thing with females is they might do like their first, let's say a typical cycle for females that I would recommend it, but let's just say that they do 20 milligrams of Anavar for 8 weeks. That seems very typical what we'll hear about in Australia. And then their first time they go, okay, well, I didn't get any virilization side effects. Like I can't notice anything. And they think that they're then this individual that can keep doing it. And what they don't realize is that they're building up their androgen load over time. So there will be a case where most likely, unless you're a pretty resilient female, where you then take your next bout of Anavar, and then all of a sudden we've got these side effects, which are like most of them are unreversible. So I think like, to your point, that it does come to that point where they're like, I fucked up, and then wanting to kind of undo it. And really our only option there is to introduce some hormone replacement therapy and sustain the use of exogenous androgens for as long as possible.
How do you I
just want to say for anyone listening as well, just for anyone listening as well, just before we sort of go on, virilization is like the presentation of masculine features in a female. Typically, well, I guess you know better than I would, but like that would be typically what would present itself before you'd see systemic damage. Am I right?
Well, it kind of depends. Like a lot of them, I think like the major concern when it comes to virilization is the shutdown of the reproductive system. And that will often happen before they see the physical side effects.
Right. Back to you, Izzy.
And how do you, obviously you just came back from the UK and like you were over in the US as well. How do you compare the Australian scene, specifically like around sort of the bikini category, compared to like overseas, and how they sort of interpret what safe practice is, etc.? Like, is there vast differences between competitors here in Australia compared to the UK and the US?
I think there definitely is. it's just like it's hard to kind of judge accurately because the people that I've been exposed to in the UK are people who are on the same mindset as me. So the people that I collaborate with, they all kind of follow the methods that I follow. And so there's that, but I wouldn't really know. I suppose so, because like Joe got me on there because he was having trouble selling. I guess that's a bad way to say it, but like convincing women that testosterone is like the safest way to go as far as your first exposure to androgens. And so that's why he tried to get a female on it to kind of go do that educational portion. So I suppose so, but I think for me, like in terms of bodybuilding, I feel like the UK are very much more open to new ideas and to learning more and developing themselves. And I feel like the women jump on board with that a lot sooner. Whereas like the females here are a little bit they're very reservative in being honest about their PED use. That then they don't seek any help or additional support because they don't want to tell anyone that that's what they're taking. I did notice a big difference in the way that they train. So I feel like a lot of female competitors here are more like high volume and like I want to get exhausted when I go to the gym. Whereas like if you look at the UK, they kind of put training first. Like you need to train at a high intensity. You need to be following your nutrition and everything as well. Whereas I feel like females here are a little bit more, let's just jump to the Anava.
Yeah. And I feel like that's obvious. Even me and you have had conversations about like Mads, and you were previously on a podcast with her, and even my initial sort of draw to bodybuilding was the UK scene and seeing how differently females train and compared to like females in Australia. Or like say you watch like Laura Lee train and like people like that, and they'll be doing sets of like 40, and like occasionally you'll hear like well-known Australian bikini coaches, they'll give people sets of like 60 reps and they're doing like 5 sets of just this crazy volume. And like I've just never understood sort of the appeal behind it and like the reasoning behind it. So I've always been so much more attracted to the UK scene just because they do seem, just like you said, like more open to everything, sort of more aligned with like new information, etc., that's coming out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think like even if you take Cooper, for example, who I know you've had on your podcast, like I think that's what attracts a lot of people to him because they see how hard he trains and they're like, I want to be like that. And I feel like that's a very attractive thing from the people coming from the UK. And I do wish that more females in Australia were a bit like that.
And I never understand like the crazy high volume either, because to me nothing feels near as good as like a super heavy and intense set. Like I finish a set of 15, or like I'm halfway through a set of 15 and I think, fuck man, like I've still got so long to go. Whereas like low volume, high intensity, for me, it just feels, and it's so much more satisfying. I find it so much more, just so much better than high volume.
Yeah, I agree. If I see a lot of volume in my program, I don't look forward to it whatsoever.
Yeah. No, sometimes I'm scrolling to the bottom of my program and I think, fuck, we have heaps. Yeah. Then even
what can I skip today?
3 setters, like I did it. I trained with a client today and I gave her a few 3-set exercises. We'd get to the end of the 2nd set and be like, I'll wrap up there. It's like, oh, but you put 3 sets. It's like, no. I'm going to change that. I'm going to change that tomorrow.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably just bouncing back a topic as well. Let me get my bearings again. Obviously, so let's say we're looking at the health drawbacks of Anavar specifically. Would we be looking at the same health drawbacks in a female as we would a male? Because obviously milligram for milligram, we're going to be running, obviously males, I've seen males run extravagant amounts of, say, let's use Anavar in this example, for little to no drawback in the long term. Obviously, what the female is going to use is a lot lower. So are we still presenting the same risk to the cardiovascular, renal systems, etc.? Or is it like that? Do you know what the point I'm trying to make?
Yeah. So we still see the drop off of like HDL levels and renal suppression. And I think like that's the way that Anavar is metabolized is what makes it so unattractive for me to kind of put towards a female. And I think like what you said, the studies that we've seen on Anavar, I guess, like as far as, I think it was like 20 milligrams was enough to drop someone HDL levels. I think it was by 40%. I'm just going, actually, I'll have it here. I'll double check. Might as well.
I'm quite sure that's accurate, actually. Definitely double check. I will add in that
30%.
as well.
So 20 milligrams be enough to drop someone HDL levels by 30%. And then they have the suppression of the endocrine testosterone as well. So then that's sort of like when we have that conversation, if females aren't wanting to use an injectable like testosterone and they choose to use an oral instead, it's sort of about that conversation. Okay, well, then we're going to have to afterwards resort back to my first suggestion, which was the testosterone replacement therapy.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that like I guess restoring baseline again in females would be the same level of difficulty as a male or greater degree of difficulty? And would there be any kind of interventions that you'd take to restore that?
I would suppose so, especially I wouldn't know whether or not females would have more of a detriment from a liver and cardiovascular health standpoint. I don't know if they'll be more fragile in that manner because they do have like that estrogen, which is a little bit more cardiovascular protective.
Mm-hmm.
But with the males, as far as like the suppression of the endocrine testosterone, the males can have that testosterone at a much higher dose to support those levels. So does that answer your question?
To some degree, yeah. It's okay. I got a bit lost with it as well. No, that's cool. I was going to add as well, like some of the worst lab work I've seen is on Anavar, which is considered like a safe drug. And likewise, a lot of guys get worried about guys specifically. Obviously, I deal with more enhanced males than I do females. They worry about the suppression that comes with testosterone because obviously it's a 100% suppression, but you still see suppression with Anavar the same. So at the end of it, typically they're still in that trough that they would have got from an injectable anyway. And I guess like just to sort of follow that up as well, like whenever someone's sort of utilized for the first time, they say, I'm going to come off, and it's like, it's probably, you're going to end up on off anyway, to a point where you're just going to say, I'm going to stay on this or stay on replacement therapy anyway. So that's probably...
Yeah, and that's sort of the same conversation with females. Like the first thing that we kind of deploy is the testosterone after we've used the non-androgenic compounds, which we can dive into if you want to.
Yeah, but I did want to. Had that written down.
Then when we introduce the testosterone be the first androgen that we use because it's bioidentical and we can test serum labs. And then from there, it's that conversation. Okay, if you're looking at being a seasonal competitor and you're going to constantly go through these bouts of experiencing HPO suppression, then it's going to be much safer for us to introduce some kind of level of testosterone. And that's sort of like the conversation. And not that I'm advocating anyone's maintaining a natural status. Like, what's the worst I'm going to do and say, oh, like you loser, you want to stay natural and maintain your health. But if we look at someone who's looking to be a seasonal competitor, it would be much healthier for them to have some level of hormonal replacement therapy in. And that would be on a needs basis. But generally for females, regardless of whether or not their testosterone levels are normal, if it was in an off season and they had normal testosterone levels, I'd probably just, and they wanted to use an exogenous estrogen, then I would jump to something like a DHT derivative. But if it was in a prep, regardless of their testosterone levels, I'd probably be more inclined to introduce testosterone anyway before I introduce anything else. And then it's about having that conversation. Okay, this testosterone is probably going to be in play so that we can maintain healthy physiological levels throughout your competitive career. And that's sort of like the same conversation that we have, like, why do we introduce thyroid? We introduce thyroid on a needs basis. If they're experiencing thyroid suppression, then we'd introduce some T4 or T3, whatever it may need be.
Yeah, that actually opened up a bit too much for me to touch on, but we're going to do it anyway. I don't know where to start. DHT derivatives or lipolytics? Where should we start?
Either. I don't mind.
Okay, so
we'll go non-androgenic first because that's the way that you.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I was going to say with the DHT derivatives is probably something that I know that little bit less about when it comes to female specifically. So let's start with lipos. So run us through what lipolytics you would deploy when you don't have to go too far into too specific, but what would be on the table? Let's start with that.
Okay, so we're looking at lipolytics specifically. Growth hormones are a really potent one in females. So that's what we call a sexually dimorphic drug, which means that it acts differently in females to males. So females don't get that same conversion from an IGF-1. It's about, I think it's 3 times less than what it is males. So we use it purely just to drive fat loss. So if they did the peak dosage of GH as far as like driving fat loss is 1 unit per 100 kilogram. So for a female, we're looking at like half a unit. However, you got to look at their physiological range, and most of them would say a 2 IU, and it is going to suppress your natural GH levels. So we usually give them 2 units of GH, would start at 1 unit, but give them 2 units of GH, 1 unit in the morning, pre-fasted cardio, 1 unit in the evening. That can just promote better sleep and more of a restful state. But so that would probably be the first one, growth hormone. The second one would be clenbuterol, which we've seen, I believe it drives up, I think 40 micrograms drives up your metabolic rate by 20%. So that's quite a significant amount. Non-androgenic again, you might get jitters and stuff from it, but I do tend to see females can take a higher dose than males. It's also what we call, what do you call it? mTOR phosphorylation properties, which means that it preserves muscle loss as well. So in a deficit, we're going to get more of those benefits. And in a surplus, we're going to get more of the benefits of being able to grow more muscle mass, but limit fat accumulation. And then we've got, Telmisartan actually does it too. It does drive down visceral fat and increase IGF-1. What else have we got? Metformin, obviously just improving your general health, so improving HDL levels and LDL levels. It's not specifically to drive fat loss, but it does do it as a byproduct as far as like improving your lipid profile and insulin sensitivity. Whatever. And then you've got your thyroid medication. So that might be your T4 and your T3. Generally, we introduce a T4 first. And then if we don't see enough conversion from T4 to T3, we can introduce a T3 as well. T3 seems to be a little bit funny to kind of deploy because it has such a half-life. You have to dose it about 3 times a day, which is just, it's not very practical for people. So T4, T3, you got your injectable L-carnitine. So if you imagine that we're freeing up all these free fatty acids from like the GH and all that, if you can imagine that, you know, like phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification, this is how I kind of imagine it. Phase 1, you kind of like getting rid of all the stuff, and then you have all that stuff kind of sitting in your bloodstream, and then phase 2 kind of washes it out. L-carnitine kind of acts the same way. So you get all these free fatty acids getting freed up, and then the L-carnitine kind of washes that out. All of these are non-androgenic. So what we're doing is we're allowing for better recovery. We're allowing for better nutrient partitioning. We're allowing for better health outcomes, better training performance, without experiencing any masculine side effects whatsoever. Will these bring about the same results as using an androgen? In the short term, no, but we can have them in all year round, which sort of means that we would be getting more out of it as opposed to the 4 to 6 week burst of androgen use that we can actually use. Because if you look at like building muscle, that takes much longer than 4 to 6 weeks. That if you can only use androgens for that short amount of time, if you want to use a safer practice model for females, then we're going to get more about having these androgens in the background first. And then they're going to act as sort of like a catalyst when we do introduce that androgen.
So obviously the first point of call would be lipolytics when you take on a competitive athlete, and then you sort of run down the road of eventually bringing in androgenic compounds to sort of facilitate growth, or whatever fits the bill in that instance. And the other one too is yohimbine. I always forget about that one because good luck finding it in Australia. I get it. I just don't think it does much.
Well, I need to make friends with you.
There's a company online that sell it as like a sex performance aid. And it
actually, no, I have seen that.
So like if you look it up as fat burner, it doesn't come up. But,
so obviously your yohimbine is your alpha-2 receptor antagonist, and alpha-2 receptor prevents lipolysis. So it will kind of shut off that process from happening. And then your clenbuterol is your beta-2 receptors, which has actions on the skeletal muscle anabolism and adipose tissue lipolysis.
So you would see, do you see a greater, do you find clenbuterol or yohimbine more effective when used in isolation? Obviously they sort of act on different pathways, but like if you had to go one or the other.
I would do clenbuterol. And I got the amount incorrect. It's 80 micrograms that drives up your energy expenditure by 21%. And fat oxidation by 39%. And then I think 80 milligrams drives up mTOR phosphorylation by 121%.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people sort of have I guess people seem to think it enables you to build muscle. It's not as direct as that, but that statistic sort of gives that some merit as well.
And then they did that in rats. I can't remember what exactly they were measuring, but that's how they kind of came to that. It drives up mTOR phosphorylation by 121%. With the yohimbine, I wouldn't have that in play for as long as clenbuterol as well, which kind of makes it not as effective. But we do find yohimbine to be a little bit more effective in females and males.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well with clients. But I must admit as well, the only issue I see with clenbuterol across the long-term health of size is like the level of fatigue that it can drive.
I noticed that too. I noticed that it impacts sleep, and I noticed that with clenbuterol, females can handle a much higher amount anecdotally than what males can.
Yeah, because personally, I use that in my last prep for a longer period, and I can't really say it was just that specifically, but that was probably the one factor which was implemented, which is something that I hadn't done before. And my exhaustion at mid-afternoon was like, I've never been that fatigued in my life. It took weeks after I wrapped up as well to sort of go back to normal, I felt. And that's sort of the observation I get amongst clients as well, which is why I don't cycle it, because obviously that's a thing of the past. But what I tend to do in that instance, you tell me if you agree or whatnot, is I do implement breaks from it.
This is yohimbine or clenbuterol?
Clenbuterol.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
It kind of depends on what goal you're trying to get. If it was a female who was sort of her first year's exposure to non-androgens, then I would probably leave it in play indefinitely. After a prep, I would definitely take it out. Just because we want to drive down some of that systemic fatigue. We don't want to constantly drive it up. So that's the only time that I'd kind of take it out. And then for a male, I would use it towards the later end of a prep.
And one thing to jump back to as well, telmisartan, what is your view? It's a staple inclusion, or is it your view that it's an as needed inclusion?
For me, it's a staple inclusion, just because of the protective benefits that it has on your renal system, left ventricular hypertrophy, the increases in IGF-1, the increases in visceral fat, and the increases in insulin sensitivity. So for me, it's just like it's not very expensive, it's not going to do any harm, and it's worth just having in play.
Yeah, the only thing I will say on that too is I don't disagree with you. I do notice in some clients we do see the potassium come quite high, resulting in when the telmisartan is brought in.
Okay.
And then obviously we run into risks associated there. That's probably the only instance where I wouldn't. So I always ask for a panel before going about that. And obviously personally, my practice is, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, because obviously there's sort of two parties out there at the moment. I'm not sure how much you've read into that. I use it as needed. I typically try to mitigate blood pressure as best I can without doing so. And then I bring it in further down the line. Obviously there's other properties which are protective of it. But the one thing that I tend to do is I always review lab work first, just for that reason.
Because it has other actions besides from just maintaining blood pressure. That's why I would say have it in anyway. If we're looking at optimizing health for enhanced athletes. The funny thing that you say about that, it drives up potassium levels. Like if they are using clenbuterol, then clenbuterol is going to drive down that potassium level, so it can kind of level out.
Actually, I had a friend actually who his potassium levels got so low during his prep that he almost had pancreatic failure. That was rough. You probably heard that one. Yeah, that was rough. He's fine now, and there was a bit more to it as well. That's okay. So obviously
he gets free insulin now. So
yeah, he does. Oh yeah, you know it. Yeah.
Worth it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he didn't give a shit, did he? And with the lipolytic pathway as well, like the presentation that growth hormone is on the table, if I told that to the females down at my local gym who are going for WBFF pro cards, they'd laugh me out of the building.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
We all know this famous female bodybuilding or bikini coach, and he posted in his stories, girls not even being able to place, but using insulin's another good one, a non-androgenic one. Not to drive fat loss, but as far as driving up hypertrophy, that's a very good one. But using insulin and GH, but not even being able to place. And I was like, dude, I know that you've had girls run Anavar for like 20 weeks because I'm the one that's left to deal with them. Like,
there's a level. The thing as well, though, with that, like, this isn't really anything too complex, but it's very easy for a coach just to tell a girl to do Anavar. Like, how do I put it? It's pretty commonplace. Like, you can sort of just stop it and start it. you don't really take any responsibility for the hormone profiles or anything like that. So I get why the guys who don't understand just throw it at them, as much as we want to argue against it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
I
like,
get
it makes sense.
Yeah, I get it too, because like even
Less
jumping on
moving
a
parts.
console,
That's probably the way to look at it. Less moving parts. Yeah.
because like jumping on a console call with a female, even though my methods are safer, and say if I want to run non-androgenic compounds for a year, I'm throwing four or even more different compounds at them at once. That, like, to them, that's a lot of drugs. Whereas like Anavar is just one pill. So I definitely see it as being like an easier option. And then it's about that conversation. And I think what I said there about him running Anavar with his clients for like 20 plus weeks, I think it's worth noting that when we look at for females, the greatest risk comes from duration of exposure as opposed to the total amount. So if we're looking at, let's just say, for example, we had the option of running 40 milligrams a week of Primo for 8 weeks, as opposed to 80 milligrams of Primo for 4 weeks, I would take the 4-week option.
Yep.
So like, that's just to put in context to you, like, it's just duration of exposure that builds up your androgen load as opposed to the total amount. Although both are important, using 10 milligrams a week of Anavar for 20 weeks isn't a small cycle.
Yeah, at all. That probably takes us to the next point with the DHT derivatives as well. One of the things which I think is probably the most difficult to understand is not commonplace, but a lot of people do understand that primobolan is a female, something that is commonly deployed in females. But then when you hear that Mastron is an alternative to that, that's sort of drops jaws, because it's just less, there's not much understanding there. And I'm going to let you sort of dive into that.
Okay, so when we're looking at like what androgens do we then deploy for females, and this is beside testosterone being the first one, we want to look at ones that have been used in females and are designed for androgen sensitive females and children in mind. So these are your things like Anavar, Masteron, and Primobolan. The other ones are going to have a higher risk for virilization. So they're going to be more androgenic. As opposed to being more anabolic, if that makes sense. So Primobolan and Masteron are going to be the preferred options when it comes to preserving a lipid profile, because they are injectable and we're limiting oral usage. And then Anavar would be my third option, just because we do still want to be sensitive to virilization side effects. However, it's not injectable. And then we go into those, that conversation is what we said about the impact on the liver and cardiovascular health. So I think that kind of answers your question, like in an off-season setting, which I would say, like, a person's first exposure to these DHT derivatives, I would only put in an off-season setting. I wouldn't put in a prep. We're looking at probably Primobolan and Masteron being able to drive more anabolism, because Anavar is more of a aesthetic kind of compound, and it drives a little bit of training performance, but we don't really see it being that great from an anabolic perspective. And then Anavar or Masteron might be in the later stages of a prep when we notice training performance start to drop off.
And why would you commonly go with Masteron or Primobolan in an off-season setting and not in a prep setting?
That would just be for their first use exposure, because then we've got ample food and ample energy availability to be able to drive up that anabolism without them being in this compromised HBO state anyway.
So this is assuming that there's a testosterone base as well?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yep, that makes complete sense.
If it was like I said before, if it was like their off season and their testosterone levels were normal, and we've gone through the use of non-androgenic compounds, I might be more inclined to use something like a Primobolan or a Masteron without touching testosterone. But if they were wanting to onboard it in a prep scenario, I would start with testosterone first.
Okay, and would you see any downregulation in natural production via the inclusion of Primo or Masteron?
Yeah, because we're still driving up androgens.
Yeah, okay. So why in that case would you not choose to deploy just testosterone base as well?
Just because, like I said, in the off season, they've got ample energy availability. That they're probably not going to see this HBO suppression with the dosages that we're using.
Understood. Okay, cool. So contrary to sort of males as well, we can utilize those kind of compounds without seeing such suppression.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's new to me, actually. That's cool.
Yeah. So I think for males, like with how high you can drive testosterone, I don't see why you wouldn't. Yeah. Off topic, one thing that always gets me, because you probably get it too, is like, will with males, like, will testosterone make me infertile? And I was like, if it did, like, that would be the best contraceptive ever.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I feel like that's quite individual as well. But like the guys that I've dealt with who have the worst fertility issues are usually like out of shape natural males. Yeah. It's never the androgen users.
Yeah. But they would get rid of all the other hormonal contraceptives that they tried to use in males, and they would give them testosterone.
Because I think in research it's only like 60% effective
For
like as a contraceptive.
testosterone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like that was like average. Don't quote me. This is a long time ago. I read over this. I think it was like 60% reduction in spermatogenesis. I'm not sure.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't know. I can't remember off the top of my head either.
I don't even want to touch it.
Yeah, no. Even when I say it's 60% effective, it's just sort of like, wait, how did they get that number? I can't remember. It's been a while.
When you're reading so much research and you're like, was it 40, 50, 60%?
Yeah. But even like, what does that mean? It's like, was that a reduction in sperm? Was that like 60% couldn't, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because I went through a little bit of a phase where I was like not big on the fertility side of it, but probably more concerned, and I just sort of wanted to know for that reason. And then you sort of look into it, and it's sort of nothing's really conclusive.
Well, the study that they did on PCT, I think it was called the Harlem
study.
Harlem study. Yeah. They saw the same kind of what do you call it? I guess regeneration of sperm from using PCT and not using PCT.
Was that with just restoring like the testosterone baseline and LH-FSH as well?
I think it was restoring fertility outcomes.
Yeah, because I know a lot of the guys really harp on that, but like anecdotally, I do see, like, it's hard to say. I've seen better outcomes with the inclusion of a PCT than without.
No, the studies show that it's pretty much similar. The only time where I would like introduce something like a HCG for a male is if he was wanting to use testosterone and get pregnant quite soon. Or if it was a younger male. So if it was a male sort of in his teens wanting to start testosterone, I would have HCG in there.
Oh, so you actually run it alongside the testosterone. Oh, interesting. See, I've never been on that camp.
Yeah, just to maintain fertility for the younger.
Even when it comes to the Harlem study, just because I'm pretty sure, don't quote me, it's like the only study of its kind.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure it is. So when guys,
PEDs is my.
Some people throw it at me and they're like, "Oh, but why would a PCT? Have you seen that study?" And it's like, it's one study. Yeah, and like I don't think do you know what the cohort was?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. No, I don't either. But I don't think it was anything ridiculous. It would be hard to get like a good big group of bodybuilders wanting to come off cycles.
I wouldn't know. It's been ages since I.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, cool. So like, for example, obviously pre-embol and the sourcing here is quite difficult as well. Do you have trouble with that, or do you just sort of lean towards that?
I don't hear, but I do understand that it is. And I do say my females, like, if you can't get it tested, don't use it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would kind of be tested Primo and tested Mastron over tested Anavar, but tested Anavar over untested Primo and untested Mastron.
Yeah, because you
never imagine that if it is testosterone, which is what it's commonly faked for, then you're going to definitely experience this virilization side effects.
Yeah, because it's difficult here to really get stuff when you know what it is. I see it happen all the time.
Yeah. Especially like when we look at the kind of the TRT dose for females, it's going to be between 3 and 10 milligrams a week. If you take like 40 milligrams of testosterone, that undoubtedly you're going to get virilization side effects.
So in those kind of instances, what kind of time frame would be looking at where you would see the virilization?
It would be highly individual. It would be dependent on their own androgen sensitivity, which is a cool thing about starting with testosterone as a base anyway. So say like if we get a female and we start her on 3 milligrams of testosterone, I know that you want to say something, Isabel, so I'll be quick with this one.
No, I've literally lost my train of thought.
Okay.
So go.
I saw her like sit up and I was like, oh, okay. So if we start a female on 3 milligrams a week of testosterone, and that brings her up to that physiological range that we're wanting her to sit at, so maybe like 60 to 90 nanograms per deciliter, then we know that she's a very androgen sensitive female, because it's only taking her that 3 milligrams to get her up to where we need her or want her. That then when we use something like a primobolan or another DHT derivative, we're going to be really reservative in the amount that we use. If we have a female that I need to bring up to maybe 8 milligrams a week to get her sitting at that amount, then I know that I can be a little bit more aggressive with the androgen load when it comes to going into super physiological ranges, because she's not as androgen sensitive as a 3 milligram female.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you'd have, basically, you would be saying you've got less risk associated with, I guess, trialing out different dosages.
So what you would do is you would always start them at the 3 milligrams, or 3 to 4 milligrams. You would wait 4 weeks, get their bloods done. And then if it's still too low, obviously you want to see it higher than what it was before you onboarded the testosterone. If it's still too low, you would bring it up 1 milligram and then test again another 4 weeks.
Cool.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're taking a girl on TRT, that's fine. What would the other moving parts of the situation be in regards to like progesterone, etc., estrogen?
Okay, so estradiol and progesterone would be something that we onboard after having TRT in there for. I would probably say have it in there for at least 6 months, ideally a year, just to kind of see what conversion we get to that estradiol. And then it's looking at the rest of their competitive career as well. Like, again, if there's competitive, repetitively going into these bouts of HPO suppression, then we might look at introducing something else. Usually it'd be firstly a progesterone. But really that's looking at the individual's estrogen to progesterone ratio. So estrogen gets a really bad rap in the bodybuilding industry, just for causing water retention and whatever else, visceral fat gain and whatnot. But it's the imbalance of estrogen that causes that. So if we see estrogen too high in relation to the progesterone, then we might introduce progesterone, given that we've done everything else to kind of improve gut health and liver health to metabolize that estrogen. Otherwise, like for me personally, I'm on everything. Progesterone, estradiol, testosterone, and T4. And that's all prescribed. So a lot of people like say to me that, I think because I talk about female PED use, people think that I take every drug under the sun, where I'm like, I'm literally prescribed that. Like I have to take that for my HRT. If I don't, I feel like absolute shit. So I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, usually what I see in females in their competitive season is that they need to introduce progesterone first. Now, if someone came to me and I saw their testosterone and their progesterone was really low, ideally I would like to start with just testosterone. However, if she was in a really bad state, as in she's not sleeping well, she's very anxious all the time, she's very irritable all the time, and it's affecting her quality of life, then I might be a little bit more inclined to introduce progesterone as well, just to make her feel a little bit better, a little bit quicker. And then estradiol, I don't really know where you would find that without going through an endocrinologist, but it would be easier if your estrogen was generally suppressed. An endocrinologist in Australia would be more inclined to prescribe that than testosterone.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So with the estrogen, we definitely want that to be a transdermal estrogen. We don't want it to be an oral estrogen.
Why is that?
So oral, the problem with the oral estrogen is its first phase metabolism through the liver. So we kind of see an increased risk of thrombosis and cardiovascular events. And there was a study done on menopausal women, and it was abruptly stopped in 2002. It was called the Women's Health Initiative, because they found a high incidence of breast cancer and cardiovascular risk that just caused them to have to stop the study. However, they only used oral estrogen, and they only used one dose of whether that be estrogen only or estrogen and progesterone replacement therapy. And the progesterone wasn't a bioidentical progesterone, which is what we want to use. So bioidentical progesterone and transdermal estrogen, whether that's a patch or a gel.
Okay, I sort of took 2 points away from that too. So obviously you're talking about this. I'm assuming that you've dealt with a lot of females who do have skewed androgen profiles requiring some kind of HRT.
Yeah.
Obviously, 10 years ago for males, that was not a thing. Like TRT now is common. Like I have guys asking me all the time, what do you think of TRT? What do you think of this? Have you got someone that I can speak to about it? And obviously more and more clients I deal with, the more labs I see, the more you realize that there are issues. And it is quite commonplace these days for males to utilize TRT. Like
the more blood work that I look at females, the more I see that their testosterone's in the dump.
Yeah, because just like talking to you right now, and obviously just referring back to my client base and clients I've worked with, I would say there's a large percentage who would fit the bill of requiring some kind of HRT, but it's just not commonplace, not even close to like commonplace. Do you see that sort of having some kind of like progression in the upcoming, say, decade?
Yeah, and particularly in testosterone. So there's recent a meta-analysis done on menopausal women, and they used testosterone. They saw profound benefits from it. And so I think that the conversation is opening up, especially in the medical field, which it might become then easier for females to get testosterone prescribed. However, there's so much lack of knowledge in the medical health space. So I even like my mom's, obviously she's gone through menopause, she's postmenopausal, and she's on a combined oral estrogen and progesterone. And the amount of times that I've told her to get off it and to see my endocrinologist, get the transdermal, get the bioidentical progesterone, having me say that, my mom thinks I'm a dumbass. Like she just is it everything that I say, she just doesn't want to take in. Like, what do you know? You're a bodybuilder kind of thing. Whereas but then it's like, and I'm going against what her health physician has told her. And that's really hard for me to have that conversation. I'm like, no, like the doctor's wrong. I'm sorry, but he's wrong. Like I can show you all these studies and stuff like that, but then for her to even understand what she's reading, it's like it's very hard to have that open conversation. But I do find us getting there. Like if, for example, like I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, trying to tell women that you're on testosterone is like a big no, but like the space is opening up for that conversation.
Yeah, even like the coaches who don't really have any idea around these concepts. I know some coaches that have no idea with female PEDs and just female health in general, and they are well-known coaches for coaching enhanced females. Discuss
me too.
anything about it. Most of them sound like men too. So
and I think that like I don't get a lot of pushback on my end because of the information that I put out there. Generally, females come to me expecting that I'm going to probably put them on testosterone if they need to be put on it.
It's funny because once I feel like just in our position, once you sort of establish that reputation, I very rarely get pushback from anyone. Like, especially in regards to like, even if you just have someone like 2-3 years ago, I'd have people in my DMs when I post certain things saying bullshit, you know what we're talking about. Like now I implore people to just try to come back at me with points that I put out there. Like, it's just, what I'm saying is they're never going to reject you because you know what you're talking about. And even then they're going to be scared that if they do confront you, like these coaches, which I'm sort of like alluding or referring to before, if they sat in a room with you, or if they sat in this, and I'm sort of even I'm sort of out of my depth right now as well, you know. Like, so I just think, imagine them.
But I think too, like Aaron Scaffy, I don't know if you know him. He's from
I do.
We do. We've had this conversation.
Yeah, we have had this conversation.
He told me once. He said, if you don't make someone upset in this industry, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
And I was like, and that from there, I was like, I don't care what people think. I'm just gonna put out what I want to put out.
As you should, though. Really, at the end of the day, like if they tried to argue with you on what your specific expertise is, like I was making the point before, it's probably not going to happen, and they're not going to win. Not that it's about winning, but like they're going to be made fool of because we've actually dedicated time to this. Like I had a guy I think I said this in the podcast with Dean even, so I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I had a guy tell me he was doing a prep with this coach and he told me what he was using and this and that, and I'm just like, your coach is wrong. I'm like, drop him as soon as you can. Like, this is ridiculous. And he's like, oh, you can't say that. You can't. Sorry?
I think you told me about that too.
No, it was only about a week ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, if he has any merit in what he's doing, ask him and tell him to message it to me. And like, obviously that's never going to happen, but I don't think they can even justify what they're doing.
I have had some females do a consult with me, and then and I've told them, I said that like it's not that your coach wants to like ruin your health. He's not sitting there behind a laptop going mwah ha ha ha, like how can I pick her up? But he generally just doesn't understand. And then she went back to him and had this conversation, and she told him what I had told him, and he was very open to it. However, there's a lot of fear associated with what people don't understand, and that's where the pushback comes from. A note that I wanted to say about you mentioned like Anavar is an easy option, and we're kind of like out of resources when it comes to deploying all this stuff for females in Australia. I believe Dean's spoken about that's why he stopped coaching females, because he wanted to use this method.
He said that to us on the podcast.
Yeah, but all that was available was Anavar, and then he's not going to sit comfortably saying to females, "I'm just going to give you Anavar."
Yeah, because he mentioned that. Yeah, he was not comfortable sort of like presenting females with that. Like, this is not your fate, but this is your fate as a bodybuilder. Are you willing to accept that?
Yeah.
With the point that he made, essentially, he didn't say it in those words. And he said he basically couldn't live with the fact, knowing that that's what needed to be done, and because of options available, and that he was at the end of that, knowing that it wasn't the right thing to do.
Yeah.
That, or they don't succeed, I guess, because you're coming up against females who are doing everything. Yeah,
exactly. Like, the caliber where athletes are at the moment, it's inevitable that you have to take the enhanced route unless you're genetically elite.
I was actually having a conversation with a client today. So she's competing in ICN. She's hoping to get the pro card, which obviously an ICN pro card has a lot less weight than an IFBB pro card. But within this country, the stepping stone from this wishful thinking, like, but let's say in a hypothetical situation, she won the pro card and she won an overall. The next step from there is, what is it? The next step is such a huge step that it's almost like you sort of need to just call it there.
And that's the same conversation for males. Like, if I've got a natural male and then he's like, hey, like, he's testosterone suppressing, he's like, hey, I need to start testosterone. Yeah, well, that eliminates us being able to compete as a natural now. So the next step is to go all out if you want to compete competitively as a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
There's no in between. And I think someone that I had a podcast with in the UK, she said that she wrote towards their natural federation and said, like, if they're experiencing HPO suppression, why is hormonal replacement therapy not allowed if it's safer for them? But there's no way to control that.
See, it's hard. Like, my ethical position on that's a weird one, because what is TRT? You know what I mean? Like, I have guys under doctors.
It's too hard to monitor. That's just easier for them to say no.
Yeah. I have guys under doctors who are pulling numbers as great as I am, and I'm on 300 milligrams.
And it is an advantage if you're on it, like because you're not getting that HBO suppression. Your body's going to be more responsive to the training and nutrition protocols.
Yeah. That was like, we also had the conversation with George Osborne, how he just wasn't coming back anymore. It took him like 9 months to like 9 nanomole or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he decided to he just couldn't do it anymore, you know?
Yeah,
which is, it's a shame. But like, I just that step, that's like I said before, like, that step from natural to enhance is so big. And like, I actually had a discussion with one of the presidents as well, because I mentioned that one of my clients was hoping to go enhanced. And he sort of, like, there's nothing technical, nothing fancy about this, but he said just make sure he realizes that once he takes that step, he's going to be exposed to a lot of things that he may not want to do, and then there's no going back. Yeah, and that was the highest risk associated with that. Yeah. Okay, before we sort of wrap up now as well, so there's a fair few points here that we could touch on, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know.
Is there anything you want to touch on? Oh, you go on, Izzy. Yeah.
I was going to say before, just like on my train of thought that I lost, in regards to females, what do you find is like the biggest reason as to why they don't want to use like as many drugs and go down sort of like the safer route, and they would rather just hop on Anavar? Like, is it the fact that they have to inject it? Like, is it costs that are associated? What's the biggest sort of kickback to them? I
don't think it's so much cost. I do think that it's a lot of drugs that you're throwing at them, that they get a little bit overwhelmed, and it is definitely the injectable. A lot of them I don't think they're afraid to pin. They just see pinning as sort of being like this taboo thing that females shouldn't do.
Like a bit intense.
And I did a video, it's not out yet, but it'll be on the Physique Collective, when I was at Joe's, and I was like, this is 1 milligram of testosterone. Like, this is all we're asking you to pin. And it's like, it's the tiniest amount. And for them, I didn't pin it to show them how to do it. I said to Joe that I should have, but it can be sub-Q. It doesn't have to be intramuscular. It's a tiny amount that you won't even notice. And I feel like if we flip that conversation, like, how many women go through IVF and have to pin themselves anyway? Or diabetics and things like that. Like, it's the same. you go and you get your vaccination or whatnot. Like it's
or like what is the
melatonin.
yeah,
Melatonin,
like the
yeah.
tanning injection.
It would be less than that.
Yeah. You have the same resistance when you sort of pitch to increase injection frequency in males.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I sort of pitch.
Males have to inject a lot more.
Yeah, but most males still want to stick to the twice a week.
Yeah.
I sort of just pitch it like it's like brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
Same thing. Do it before bed. Whenever you want to do it, that's fine.
Yeah, I always encourage them to backload a bunch of insulin syringes and just
I get skeptical on the backloading because I know the oils can break down the rubber. I don't know how much.
I think it's going to be safer than them doing it twice a week.
Oh, of course. I'm just saying, like, actually backloading. Are you saying backload and store them, or backload and then inject it straight away?
No, I would backload them at the start of the week.
Oh, okay, 7 days you might be fine.
Just to make it easier for them. So like they draw out their whole week's total and then backload the insulin syringes. Yeah,
because I have males that are more inclined to want to take like an Aromasin or an Arimidex before they'll push their injection frequency up.
Yeah.
And even for hematocrit management, I'm pretty sure the frequency of injection is huge.
Yeah.
And
if we have the conversation, like, so Izzy, on your point, like, if a male came to you and said that he only wants to use orals, the conversation would be no. It's just it's plain out no, like it's too unsafe.
Yeah.
But then why is that different for females? And like that's sort of where if I put it like that, it tends to kind of skew their perception of it a little bit better. Yeah.
You still see I find with the males that do orals only, they end up on injectables anyway.
Yeah.
Almost 9 times out of 10.
But that would be the same with females because they're going to have to.
Of course. Yeah. Probably just a little bit more of a learning curve there. I think males just hesitate with the injectable until they see the orals and like, this worked good, let's just try it. It's like they get psyched into it. Yeah. All right. So we probably should wrap up there because obviously you have the console now. Thank you for jumping on. We have a lot more topics that we were hoping to get through. We'll do an episode 2.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
I've never done a part 2.
Oh, really? Yeah, we haven't either. But like right now, like honestly, I think we got through 3 points out of 10. So that's cool.
It'll probably then, because like you've kind of got like a little bit of an idea, I guess, like then we'll be able to structure the questions a little bit more specifically. We could even do like a Q&A after this one gets released.
Oh, that would be cool, actually. Yeah. I really am hoping that there can be some traction made in regards to female, like enhanced female athletes, because there's such a small market for it. So that would be awesome. We'll take some time, but eventually.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes, no worries. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Come train with me soon.
I will. Thank you. Bye.